The red-tailed hawk's piercing scream cut through the autumn air like a knife, and Owen Yates reined in his mare so sharply she nearly reared. He sat still in his saddle, scanning the rocky terrain of northern New Mexico Territory in 1879, trying to pinpoint where that anguished cry had come from. The October sun beat down on his shoulders as he listened, his hand instinctively moving to rest on the rifle holstered at his side. He had been riding for 3 days straight from Taos, heading south toward his brother's ranch near Socorro, and every bone in his body ached for rest. But that sound, that desperate screaming, pulled at something deep in his chest. There it was again, closer this time, coming from a cluster of junipers about 50 yards to his left. Owen dismounted and tied his horse to a scrubby pinyon pine before making his way carefully over the rocky ground. The screaming grew louder, more frantic, and he moved faster despite his exhaustion. When he pushed through the low-hanging branches, he found the source. A magnificent hawk, its rust-colored tail feathers spread wide in panic, thrashed violently against the iron teeth of a trap. The cruel device had caught the bird's left leg, and blood matted the feathers around the wound. Owen's jaw tightened. He recognized the trap as one made for coyotes or foxes, likely set by some passing trapper months ago and forgotten. "Easy now," he murmured, approaching slowly with his hands visible. The hawk screamed again and beat its wings harder, terror in its golden eyes. Owen knew he had maybe minutes before the bird died from shock and exhaustion. He shrugged off his leather jacket and held it ready. The hawk was dangerous, even injured, those talons on its good legs sharp enough to tear flesh to the bone, that curved beak capable of punching through to muscle. But he could not leave it here to die slowly in the merciless sun. In one swift movement, he threw the jacket over the bird's head and body, plunging it into darkness. The hawk immediately stopped thrashing, and Owen worked fast, using both hands to pry open the trap's spring-loaded jaws. The metal groaned and his muscles strained, but finally the jaws released. He pulled the bird free, jacket and all, and quickly examined the damage. The leg was badly injured but not broken, as far as he could tell. The hawk needed care, needed water and rest, and someone who knew how to treat such wounds. Owen was still debating what to do when a voice behind him froze him in place. "That is my hawk." He turned slowly, still holding the bundled bird, and found himself looking at an Apache woman standing at the edge of the clearing. She could not have been more than 22 or 23 years old, and she held herself with a warrior's readiness despite carrying no visible weapon. Her dark eyes assessed him with an intensity that made him feel transparent, as if she could read every thought crossing his mind. She wore traditional Apache dress, buckskin decorated with intricate beadwork, and her long black hair hung in a thick braid over one shoulder. "I am sorry," Owen said carefully, keeping his voice steady. "I heard him screaming and found him in this trap. His leg is hurt bad." The woman moved forward with surprising speed, and Owen instinctively lifted the bundled hawk toward her. She took it from him with practiced hands, pulling back the jacket just enough to examine the injury. Her face remained composed, but he saw the flash of pain in her eyes as she looked at the wound. "He has been missing for 2 days," she said quietly. "I have been searching." "I can help treat the wound," Owen offered. "I have some supplies with my horse, whiskey to clean it, cloth for bandages." She studied him for a long moment, and Owen felt the weight of her evaluation. He was a white man in Apache territory, at a time when tensions ran high and trust came harder than gold. But finally, she gave a slight nod. "My name is Otsana Cruz," she said, the Spanish surname marking her as likely from one of the Apache bands that had intermarried with Mexican families over the generations. "This is Sky Dancer. He has been my companion for 5 years. Owen Yates, he replied, holding her gaze. I mean no harm to you or your hawk. They walked together back to where his horse stood patiently waiting. Owen retrieved his saddlebags and pulled out his small medical kit, a battered tin box that had seen him through numerous injuries over his years riding the territory. Otsana watched him work, still holding Sky Dancer wrapped securely in Owen's jacket. There is a stream not far from here, she said. Better water for cleaning the wound. She led him through the scrubland with the confidence of someone who knew this land like the lines of her own palm. They walked in silence, and Owen found himself studying her from the corner of his eye. She moved with a grace that made no sound, her feet finding the quietest path over the rocky ground. Everything about her spoke of competence and strength, qualities he had always admired. The stream turned out to be more of a creek, shallow but clear, running between red sandstone banks. Otsana knelt beside it and carefully unwrapped Sky Dancer. The hawk, exhausted from his ordeal, offered only weak resistance as she examined his leg more closely in the better light. Owen knelt beside her and opened his kit. "May I?" She hesitated, then shifted slightly to give him better access. Working together, they cleaned the wound with whiskey that made the hawk scream once more in protest. Owen's hands were steady as he applied a poultice he had learned to make from a Navajo trader, a mixture of herbs that helped prevent infection. Otsana watched his every move, and he felt her approval when he finished by wrapping the leg carefully but not too tightly. "You know what you are doing," she observed. "I have had to doctor plenty of animals over the years," Owen replied. "Horses mostly, but the principle is the same. Keep it clean, keep it from swelling, give it time to heal." Otsana rewrapped Sky Dancer more loosely in the jacket, leaving his head free this time. The hawk's eyes were clearer now, less wild with panic, though he still trembled with exhaustion. "He needs rest," Otsana said. "Days of it, maybe weeks before he can fly again. And I must watch for infection, change the bandages every day." Owen nodded, preparing to gather his supplies and take his leave. He had already lost several hours of daylight, and his brother would be expecting him before the first snow came. But then Otsana spoke again, and her words changed everything. "Where are you traveling?" "South to Socorro," Owen said. "My brother has a ranch there. I am going to help him with the winter work." She was quiet for a moment, stroking Sky Dancer's head with one gentle finger. When she looked up at him, her expression was carefully neutral, but he sensed the struggle behind her words. "The winter will be hard this year," she said. "The signs have been clear for weeks. Early frost, animals storing more food than usual, the birds flying south sooner than normal. I have a small cabin in the hills, but it is difficult to hunt and trap when I must also care for Sky Dancer, and I am alone." Owen understood what she was not quite asking. "You need help." "I am asking if you would stay the winter," she said directly, meeting his eyes. "In exchange for helping me hunt and prepare for the cold months, you would have shelter, food, and a warm fire. When spring comes and Sky Dancer is healed, you can continue south." It was an unusual request, strange enough that Owen should have refused immediately. He did not know this woman, did not know if he could trust her or if she could trust him. The situation could easily become complicated or dangerous. But something in her eyes, a combination of pride and vulnerability, made him pause. "I would not impose on your hospitality without contributing," he said slowly. "And I would respect your home and your space. But yes, if you are truly asking, I would stay and help you through the winter." Relief flickered across her face so quickly he almost missed it. "Then it is agreed. My cabin is half a day's ride north of here. We should go now if we want to arrive before dark." They walked back to his horse together, and Owen noticed for the first time that Otsana had her own mount, a sturdy paint pony, waiting in a hidden hollow nearby. She had been prepared to carry Sky Dancer home regardless of whether Owen helped or not. That independence impressed him. The ride north took them deeper into hill country, where ponderosa pines replaced the scrubby junipers and the air grew noticeably cooler. Otsana rode with Sky Dancer secured in a sling across her chest, keeping him stable and warm. Owen followed slightly behind, giving her space to lead while he processed the decision he had just made. He knew next to nothing about this woman, except that she clearly loved her hawk and had the courage to ask a stranger for help. That took a special kind of strength, especially in a time when her people had been driven from their lands, forced onto reservations or into hiding in the remote corners of the territory. The fact that she had a cabin at all, that she lived independently rather than on a reservation, told him she was resourceful and determined. The sun was touching the western horizon when they finally reached her cabin. It sat in a small valley between two hills, built solidly from pine logs and chinked with mud. A good-sized corral stood empty beside it, and Owen could see a small garden plot that had recently been harvested. Smoke did not rise from the stone chimney, confirming that she had been away searching for Sky Dancer. "There is space in the lean-to for your horse," Otsana said, dismounting carefully to avoid jostling the hawk. "The corral gate is broken, but I have been meaning to fix it." "I can do that tomorrow," Owen offered, leading his mare toward the shelter she had indicated. Inside, the cabin was simple but well-maintained. A stone fireplace dominated one wall with a cooking pot hanging from an iron hook. A narrow bed covered with blankets and furs occupied one corner, while shelves lined with supplies and tools covered another wall. In the rafters, Owen spotted a perch clearly made for Sky Dancer, padded and positioned near the warmth of the fireplace. Otsana was already at work building a fire when Owen came in with his saddlebags. She moved efficiently, and soon flames crackled and spread warmth through the single room. She made a temporary nest for Sky Dancer near the hearth, using soft rabbit furs and positioning him where he could see the entire room but remain undisturbed. "I will sleep outside," Owen said. "I have blankets and a bedroll. I do not want you to feel uncomfortable." Otsana looked at him for a long moment. "There is a storage shed behind the cabin. It is small but dry, and there is room for a bedroll. That would be better than sleeping in the open. Thank you." They prepared a simple meal together, working in a silence that was surprisingly comfortable given they had met only hours before. Otsana made coffee in a battered pot while Owen cut salt pork into a pan. She added wild onions and dried corn to the meat, creating a stew that filled the cabin with savory smells. As they ate, sitting on opposite sides of the small table, Owen found himself studying her face in the firelight. She had strong features, high cheekbones, and a straight nose, and when she glanced up and caught him looking, he felt heat rise to his face. "Tell me about Sakura," she said, either not noticing his embarrassment or choosing to ignore it. "Is your brother's ranch large?" "Large enough," Owen replied. "He raises cattle and horses. He wrote asking me to come help because he broke his leg last spring and it did not heal right. He cannot do all the work alone anymore. But you did not want to go." It was a statement, not a question, and Owen wondered how she had guessed. "I like moving around," he admitted. "I have worked ranches from Texas to California, never staying anywhere too long. The idea of settling down has always felt like putting on a rope halter." Otsana nodded slowly. "I understand that feeling. Before I came here, I traveled with my mother's people. We moved with the seasons, never staying long in one place. But after she died, I wanted something different, I wanted a home. How long have you been here? 3 years. I built this cabin myself, with some help from traders who passed through. It is small, but it is mine. There was fierce pride in her voice, and Owen respected it. He knew how hard it must have been for her to survive alone out here, especially as an Apache woman in territory where her people were viewed with suspicion and hostility by many white settlers. "Sky Dancer," he said, nodding toward the hawk dozing in his nest. "How did you come to have him?" A slight smile touched Otsana's lips, the first real smile he had seen from her. "I found him as a fledgling, fallen from his nest. A snake was about to strike when I came upon them. I killed the snake and took the young hawk home. I did not know if he would survive, but I fed him and cared for him. When he was strong enough to fly, I expected him to leave and never return, but he stayed. Every morning he hunts, and every evening he comes back to his perch. Until 2 days ago." "Until 2 days ago," she agreed, the smile fading. "I was afraid I would never see him again. And then I heard him screaming and followed the sound. When I saw you holding him, I did not know what to think. I thought perhaps you had trapped him yourself." "I would never," Owen said firmly. "I hate those traps. They are cruel and indiscriminate. They kill and maim animals that were never the intended target." "We agree on that," Otsana said quietly. They finished their meal and cleaned up together, falling into an easy rhythm of shared work. When Otsana showed Owen to the storage shed, he found that she had already placed a lantern there and cleared space on the floor. It was tight quarters, barely larger than a horse stall, but it was indeed dry and would hold warmth better than sleeping under the stars. "Thank you again," he said, "for trusting me enough to let me stay." Otsana met his eyes in the lamplight. "You saved Sky Dancer when you could have ridden past. That tells me what kind of man you are, but trust is earned over time, not given freely." "I understand. Tomorrow we have much work to do," she continued. "Winter comes fast in these hills. We need more firewood, the corral needs repair, and I want to check my traps before the first snow." "I will be ready." She nodded and turned to go, then paused. "Owen Yates, I am glad you found Sky Dancer. I am glad you are here." Before he could respond, she disappeared into the darkness toward the cabin. Owen stood for a moment, listening to the night sounds of the hills around them, and wondered what he had gotten himself into. The next morning dawned clear and cold, frost painting the grass silver. Owen woke to the sound of Otsana already moving around outside, and he quickly dressed and emerged to find her feeding her pony and his mare handfuls of grain. "Good morning," he said, his breath forming clouds in the chill air. "The creek is behind those trees," she replied, pointing. "The water is cold but clean." Owen washed quickly in the icy stream, the shock of it driving away the last cobwebs of sleep. When he returned to the cabin, he found Otsana had prepared breakfast, simple cornmeal cakes fried in bacon grease. They ate quickly, both eager to start the day's work. First they checked on Sky Dancer. The hawk seemed stronger this morning, more alert, though he still could not put weight on his injured leg. Otsana carefully changed his bandage, her hands gentle but efficient, and Owen was impressed by her skill. She clearly had experience tending to injuries, both animal and probably human. "The wound looks better," Owen observed. "No sign of infection yet." "We must keep watching," Otsana replied. "The next few days will tell us if he will truly recover." They spent the morning repairing the corral, replacing broken rails and reinforcing the gate. Owen was skilled with his hands, and Otsana worked beside him with equal competence, handing him tools before he asked and holding boards steady while he hammered. They worked well together, he realized, communicating more through gesture and intuition than words. By afternoon, they had moved on to gathering firewood. Otsana led him to a stand of dead trees about a mile from the cabin, and they worked with a two-man saw to cut the trunks into manageable lengths. The physical labor felt good after days of riding, and Owen found himself relaxing into the rhythm of the work. "You are strong," Otsana commented as they loaded cut wood onto a travois attached to her pony. "Stronger than you look," Owen laughed. "I have been working with my hands since I was tall enough to hold an axe. My father had a farm in Missouri, and we all worked it together, every one of his 6 children." "6," Otsana repeated, something wistful in her tone. "I was an only child. My mother always said I was enough trouble for 3 children. Were you?" She shot him a look that might have been amusement. "I was curious. I asked too many questions. I wanted to learn everything, do everything. My mother's brother, my uncle, he taught me to track and hunt because I would not leave him alone until he did." "And now you live alone in these hills, surviving by those skills," Owen said. "Your uncle taught you well." "He did. He died 5 years ago, killed by soldiers who thought he was part of a raiding party. He was not. He was simply an Apache man in the wrong place at the wrong time." The bitterness in her voice was sharp, and Owen understood. The injustices perpetrated against the Apache people were well known, brutal stories of massacre and betrayal. He had no words that could ease that pain, so he simply said, "I am sorry." They worked in silence for a while longer, and by the time the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, they had gathered enough wood to last several weeks. The travois groaned under the weight as they led the horses back toward the cabin. That evening, after another simple meal, they sat by the fire while Otsana worked on tanning a deer hide stretched on a frame. Owen watched her skilled hands scraping the flesh side clean, preparing it for the smoking process. "Will you tell me about your family?" she asked without looking up from her work. "The ones in Missouri." Owen leaned back against the log wall, memories flooding back. "My father died when I was 17, thrown from a horse. My mother followed him 2 years later, just seemed to lose the will to live. My brothers and sisters scattered after that. 2 of my sisters married farmers and stayed in Missouri. One brother went east to St. Louis, got a job working in a factory. My younger brother came west and started the ranch near Socorro. My other brother, no one has heard from him in years. Last we knew he was in California. And you," I drifted. "Worked cattle drives, broke horses, did whatever work I could find, never wanted to be tied down, I suppose, never wanted to feel trapped." Otsana paused in her scraping and looked at him. "Is that why you saved Sky Dancer?" "Because you understand what it feels like to be caught." The question struck deeper than Owen expected. "Maybe," he admitted. "I never thought about it that way, but maybe you are right." They fell into silence again, but it was a comfortable quiet, the kind that exists between 2 people who are beginning to understand each other. Sky Dancer ruffled his feathers from his nest by the fire, and they both glanced over to check on him. The hawk's eyes were bright and alert, watching them with what Owen could have sworn was interest. Days turned into weeks, and a routine established itself. Each morning they would check Sky Dancer's injury, relieved to see it healing cleanly. Each day they worked together, preparing for winter in countless ways. They hauled more firewood, checked and reset Otsana's trap line, hunted deer and rabbits, and preserved meat for the cold months ahead. Owen found himself looking forward to the evenings most of all, when they would sit by the fire and talk. Otsana told him stories of her childhood, of traveling with her mother's band through mountains and deserts, of learning the names of every plant and animal. Owen shared his own stories, tales of cattle drives and wild horses, of storms and stampedes and the vast loneliness of the prairie. Slowly, carefully, they were building something between them. Trust, yes, but also something deeper that neither of them was quite ready to name. One morning in early November, Owen woke to find the world transformed by the first real snowfall. Several inches blanketed everything, muffling sound and painting the landscape in shades of white and gray. He emerged from the storage shed to find Otsana already outside, her face turned up to catch falling snowflakes on her tongue. She looked younger like this, carefree and joyful, and Owen's heart did something unexpected in his chest. When she noticed him watching, she grinned, completely unself-conscious. "The first snow is always magical," she said. "No matter how many winters I see, I always feel like a child again when the first flakes fall." "We had better check the horses," Owen said, though what he really wanted was to keep watching her smile. "Make sure they have enough shelter." They worked together to ensure the animals were comfortable, then returned to the cabin to find Sky Dancer standing on his injured leg for the first time since the accident. The hawk balanced carefully, favoring the leg but able to bear weight. Otsana made a small sound of joy and moved closer, offering the bird a strip of dried meat. "He is healing," she breathed. "Owen, he is truly healing." The way she said his name with such happiness and warmth made Owen feel like he had been given something precious. He moved to stand beside her, watching as Sky Dancer tore into the meat with renewed vigor. "He will fly again," Owen said. "Maybe not for a while yet, but he will fly." Otsana turned to him, and the look in her eyes was unguarded for perhaps the first time since they had met. "Thank you," she said softly. "If you had not found him, if you had not stopped to help, he would have died in that trap. You gave him back to me. I just did what anyone would do." "No," she said firmly, "not anyone. Most people would have ridden past, not wanting to risk the injury a frightened hawk could inflict. You risked yourself for an animal you had never seen before. That meant nothing to you. That is not something just anyone would do." They stood very close now, and Owen was acutely aware of every detail. The way snowflakes had melted in her dark hair, leaving it glistening. The warmth of her breath in the cold air. The way her eyes searched his face as if looking for something specific. "Otsana," he said, then stopped, not sure what he wanted to say. She waited, and the moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. But then Sky Dancer screeched, demanding more food, and they both laughed, the tension breaking into something lighter. That night, they made venison stew with wild onions and herbs Otsana had dried over the summer. The cabin was warm and comfortable, the fire crackling cheerfully, snow falling steadily outside. Sky Dancer dozed on his perch, and the horses were safe in the lean-to. In this moment, everything felt perfect and complete. "Tell me something you have never told anyone else," Otsana said suddenly as they sat across from each other at the small table. Owen considered the request, then decided on honesty. "I am afraid of ending up alone," he admitted. "I know that sounds strange coming from someone who has spent years drifting from place to place, never settling down. But underneath all that moving around, I think I have always been searching for something, for a place or a person that feels like home. I am afraid I will never find it." Otsana was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the worn wood of the table. "I am afraid of the same thing," she finally said. "That is why I built this cabin, why I stay here even though it is hard and lonely sometimes. I thought if I made a home, if I created a place that was mine, I would not have to be afraid anymore. But having a place is not the same as having a home. I have learned that." "What is the difference?" Owen asked. "A home is more than walls and a roof," she said, meeting his eyes. "It is a place where you belong, where you are known and accepted. It is having someone who sees you for who you truly are and chooses to stay anyway." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Owen felt his pulse quicken. Otsana, but she stood abruptly, her expression suddenly guarded again. It is late. We should sleep. Tomorrow we need to check the trap line before the snow gets too deep. Owen recognized the retreat for what it was, a pulling back from vulnerability. He wanted to push to finish what he had been about to say, but he also understood the need for caution. Whatever was growing between them needed time and patience. "Good night, Otsana," he said softly. "Good night, Owen." The next morning dawned cold and clear, the sun making the snow-covered landscape sparkle like it was covered in diamonds. They bundled up in layers and set out to check the trap line, following a route that wound through the hills. Sky Dancer watched from his perch as they left, his intelligent eyes tracking their movements. The traps had been successful. They found 2 rabbits and had to reset several sprung traps. As they worked, Otsana taught Owen to read the signs in the snow, showing him tracks and identifying the animals that had made them. "See here," she said, crouching beside a set of prints. "Mountain lion. A large one, male probably. He passed through maybe an hour after the snow stopped." Owen studied the tracks, impressed by how much information she could glean from simple indentations in the snow. "Is he a danger to the horses? Possibly. We should be more careful about securing the lean-to at night. A hungry cat will go after easy prey." They continued their rounds, and Owen found himself constantly aware of Otsana's presence beside him. The way she moved through the landscape with such natural grace. The way her breath formed clouds in the cold air. The way she smiled when she found animal tracks she recognized. He was falling for her, he realized with a start. Somewhere between saving Sky Dancer and chopping firewood and sitting by the fire sharing stories, he had fallen completely and irrevocably in love with this strong, independent Apache woman who had trusted him enough to let him into her life. The revelation should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. But loving her and knowing if she felt the same were 2 different things entirely. Owen had no idea how to broach the subject, or if he even should. She had asked him to stay the winter, nothing more. Perhaps when spring came and Sky Dancer was healed, she expected him to leave and continue on to his brother's ranch. The thought made his chest ache. They were heading back to the cabin, game bag heavy with rabbits, when Otsana suddenly stopped. Owen followed her gaze and saw 3 riders approaching from the south, moving slowly through the snow. "You know them?" he asked quietly. "No." Her hand moved to the knife at her belt. "We should get back to the cabin." But the riders had already seen them and were changing direction to intercept. Owen's hand moved to his rifle, though he kept it holstered. Starting a fight would only end badly for everyone. The 3 men were white, rough-looking, the kind of drifters who made their living through means both legal and otherwise. The one in front, a man with a scarred face and mean eyes, smiled as he reined in his horse about 10 feet away. "Well now," he drawled, "what do we have here?" "Looks like an Indian squaw and her white man. We want no trouble," Owen said evenly. "We are just heading home." "Home," the scarred man repeated, looking past them toward where the cabin's smoke was visible above the trees. "That your place?" "It is mine," Otsana said coldly. "And you are not welcome there." The man's smile widened, showing yellow teeth. "Now that is not very friendly. We have been riding for days in this cold. We were hoping to find some warm hospitality." "Find it somewhere else," Owen said, moving slightly to position himself between Otsana and the riders. "Like I said, we want no trouble." One of the other men, younger with a patchy beard, leaned forward in his saddle. "Boss, maybe we should just take what we need." She is just an Indian and he is just one man. The situation was deteriorating fast. Owen's mind raced through options, none of them good. 3 against 1 was poor odds, and even if he could take them, Otsana might get hurt in the crossfire. "Listen carefully," Owen said, his voice dropping to a dangerous tone he rarely used. "We have nothing worth stealing, and if you try to follow us or cause any trouble, you will regret it. There are Apache camps all through these hills, and they do not take kindly to men who threaten their people." It was a bluff, a desperate gamble. For all Owen knew, there were no Apache within 100 miles. But the scarred man's eyes flickered with uncertainty, and Owen pressed his advantage. "You think she is alone out here? You think her people do not check on her, do not watch these hills? You want to risk starting something you cannot finish." The 3 men exchanged glances, and Owen could see doubt creeping in. "Good. Let them wonder. Let them imagine warriors waiting in the trees." Finally, the scarred man spat in the snow and pulled his horse's head around. "Not worth it," he muttered. "Come on, boys. Let us find easier pickings." They rode off heading west, and Owen did not relax until they disappeared over a ridge. Only then did he turn to Otsana and find her looking at him with an expression he could not quite read. "That was clever," she said. "And brave, but there are no camps near here. My mother's band is on a reservation 200 miles south. If those men had called your bluff, we would have been in serious trouble." "I know," Owen admitted, "but I could not think of anything else. And I was not going to let them threaten you without doing something." Something shifted in her expression, softening. "You would have fought them if necessary. 3 against 1. Yes. Why?" The question was simple, but the answer was not. Owen met her eyes and decided it was time for complete honesty. "Because the thought of anything happening to you is unbearable to me. Because in these weeks I have spent here, you have become more important to me than I knew another person could be. Because I think I am falling in love with you, Otsana, and I do not know what to do about it." The words hung in the cold air between them. Otsana's eyes widened, and for a moment Owen was certain he had made a terrible mistake, that he had misread everything and ruined the fragile friendship they had built. But then she stepped forward and took his hand, pulling off both their gloves so her warm fingers could intertwine with his. "I am glad you said that," she whispered, "because I have been feeling the same way and was afraid you did not feel it too. I was afraid you saw me only as someone who needed your help, not as a woman you could care for." "How could I not care for you?" Owen asked, bringing his other hand up to cup her cheek. "You are the strongest, bravest, most remarkable person I have ever met. You have built a life for yourself in spite of everything the world has thrown at you. You are kind to animals and honest with people. You have let me into your home and your life even though you had no reason to trust me. How could I possibly not fall in love with you?" Tears shimmered in Otsana's eyes, but she was smiling. "I built this cabin hoping to find a home," she said. "But it never felt complete, never felt right until you were here. When I think about spring coming and you leaving to go to your brother's ranch, I feel like my heart is being torn in two." "Then I will not go," Owen said simply. "Or we will go together, or we will stay here. Whatever you want, wherever you want to be, that is where I want to be too." She rose up on her toes and kissed him, and Owen felt like every wandering step of his life had been leading him to this moment. Her lips were soft and warm despite the cold, and when they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling. "We should get back to the cabin," Otsana said, though she made no move to step away from him. "Sky Dancer will be wondering where we are." Owen laughed and kissed her again, quickly this time, then took her hand properly. They walked back through the snow together, closer now, no longer maintaining the careful distance they had kept before. The horses' tracks from earlier had already been partially covered by fresh snowfall, and the world felt new and full of possibilities. When they arrived at the cabin, Sky Dancer greeted them with his piercing call, and Otsana laughed. "He knows something has changed," she said. Animals always know. That night, they prepared dinner together as always, but everything felt different now. Every accidental touch sent electricity through Owen's body. Every shared glance carried layers of meaning. They ate slowly, drawing out the meal, talking about everything and nothing. "What do you think your brother will say?" Otsana asked as they washed dishes. "When spring comes and you do not arrive at his ranch, I will write to him," Owen said. "Explain that I have found a reason to stay in these hills. He will understand. Thomas was always the romantic of the family. But he will need help with the ranch. He can hire someone. He has money for that, and there are plenty of men looking for work. He wanted family around him, I think, more than he needed the labor. But he would be the first to tell me to follow my heart." Otsana set down the plate she was drying and turned to him. "Are you certain? I do not want you to give up your family for me, to have regrets later." Owen took the towel from her hands and set it aside, then pulled her close. "I am more certain of this than I have ever been about anything. I spent 30 years of my life drifting, never settling down, always moving to the next place. I thought that was freedom, but real freedom is not running away from everything. Real freedom is choosing what matters and holding on to it. You matter, Otsana. You matter more than anything else." She wrapped her arms around him and held tight, her face pressed against his chest. "I never thought I would find someone who could understand me," she said softly. "Someone who would see me as more than just an Apache woman, more than just a survivor. You see all of me, the strong parts and the scared parts, and you stay anyway." "I will always stay," Owen promised, "for as long as you want me here." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other while the fire crackled and Sky Dancer dozed on his perch. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white silence. Inside, everything was warm and safe and exactly where it needed to be. As winter deepened, so did their relationship. Owen moved his belongings from the storage shed into the cabin, and they fell into the intimate rhythms of a shared life. They worked together during the day, hunting and trapping and maintaining their small homestead. At night they would sit by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes simply enjoying each other's presence. Sky Dancer grew stronger every day. By mid-December he was hopping around the cabin, testing his injured leg and growing increasingly restless. Otsana would take him outside on clear days, letting him stretch his wings without trying to fly yet. The hawk seemed to understand he was still healing and did not push too hard. One morning, Owen woke to find Otsana already up, standing by the window and watching the sunrise paint the snowy landscape in shades of pink and gold. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, and she leaned back against him with a contented sigh. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, resting his chin on top of her head. "About how different my life looks now compared to a year ago," she said. "Last winter I was alone here, wondering if I had made a mistake building this cabin so far from everyone. I was lonely and scared, though I would never have admitted it to anyone. And now you are here and everything is different." "Better different?" Owen asked, though he knew the answer. "So much better I cannot even find words for it." She turned in his arms to face him. "Owen, I need to tell you something important." His heart skipped. "What is it?" "In my mother's traditions, when a man and woman choose to be together, to share a life, there is a ceremony. It is simple but sacred. I want that with you. I want us to be joined properly, not just living together but truly married in the eyes of my ancestors and yours." Owen felt his chest expand with joy. "Are you asking me to marry you, Otsana Cruz?" She smiled, looking both nervous and hopeful. "Yes, I am. Will you marry me, Owen Yates?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "Yes, 1,000 times yes. They married themselves on the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, in a private ceremony that blended both their traditions as best they could. Otsana wore her finest buckskin dress, decorated with intricate beadwork her mother had done years before. Owen wore a clean shirt and had spent the morning shaving and making himself presentable. They stood outside in the snow with Sky Dancer perched on a nearby branch, watching with his intense golden eyes. Otsana had taught Owen the words to say in her language, promises to honor and protect and cherish. He spoke them as best he could with his unpracticed tongue, and she smiled through tears at his effort. Then Owen spoke his own vows in English, simpler but no less heartfelt. I promise to stand beside you through all the seasons to come. I promise to work hard and provide for you and any children we may have. I promise to listen when you speak and hold you when you cry. I promise to love you until my last breath and beyond. Otsana repeated the words in Apache, her voice steady and clear. Then they joined hands and stood in silence, letting the moment settle into their bones. Sky Dancer screeched once, a piercing call that echoed off the hills, and they both laughed. Even our witness approves, Owen said, pulling Otsana close for a kiss. That night they celebrated with a feast Otsana had been secretly preparing for days. Roasted venison, cornbread sweetened with wild honey, dried berries stewed with spices. They ate until they could not hold another bite, and then Owen produced a surprise of his own. I rode to the trading post last week while you were checking traps, he admitted. I wanted to get you something special. He handed her a small package wrapped in cloth, and she opened it carefully to reveal a silver comb, simple but beautifully made, with turquoise stones set into the handle. Owen, she breathed, running her fingers over the smooth silver. This is too much. Nothing is too much for you, he said. I wanted you to have something beautiful, something that will last, something you can pass down to our children someday. Otsana's eyes filled with tears, and she carefully set the comb aside before throwing her arms around him. I love you, she said fiercely. I love you so much it scares me sometimes. I love you too, Owen replied, holding her tight. You never have to be scared. I am not going anywhere. Winter passed in a blur of contentment. January brought heavy snows that made traveling difficult, so they stayed close to the cabin, venturing out only to hunt when necessary. Owen spent the long evenings teaching Otsana to read better, using a battered Bible he carried in his saddlebags. She was a quick student, and soon she was reading passages aloud by firelight, her pronunciation improving with each session. In turn, Otsana taught him more of her language, correcting his accent and teaching him not just words but the deeper meanings behind them. She taught him about her people's history and beliefs, stories that had been passed down through generations. Owen listened to everything with genuine interest, wanting to understand the heritage that had shaped the woman he loved. Sky Dancer was almost completely healed by February. The hawk had been exercising his wings regularly, and one morning he took his first tentative flight, gliding from his perch to the rafters and back. Otsana clapped her hands in delight, and even Owen felt emotional watching the bird regain his freedom. Soon he will want to go outside and really fly, Otsana said, watching Sky Dancer preen his feathers proudly. When the weather clears, I will take him out and see if he is ready. The day came in early March when the sun shone warm enough to melt icicles from the cabin's eaves. They took Sky Dancer outside, and Otsana held her arm up high, giving the hawk a platform to launch from. Are you ready, old friend? She asked softly. Sky Dancer looked at her, then at the open sky above, then back at her again. For a moment, Owen thought the hawk might choose to stay grounded, that perhaps he had forgotten how to be wild. But then Sky Dancer spread his wings, pumped them once, twice, and took off. He rose steadily into the clear morning air, circling higher and higher until he was just a dark speck against the blue. Otsana watched with her hand shading her eyes, and Owen saw both joy and sadness on her face. "He might not come back," she said quietly. "Now that he can fly again, he might remember that he is a wild thing and never return. Or he might remember that he has a home here," Owen replied, taking her hand. "Just like I did." They stood watching for nearly an hour as Sky Dancer soared and dove, and reacquainted himself with the freedom of flight. Then, just as Owen was starting to think Otsana had been right about him leaving forever, the hawk began descending in wide spirals. He came lower and lower, finally landing on the perch they had erected outside the cabin specifically for this purpose. Sky Dancer tucked his wings neatly against his body, shook himself once, and settled down as if he had never been gone. Otsana laughed, a sound of pure relief and happiness, and rushed over to offer the hawk a piece of dried meat. "You came back," she said, stroking his feathers gently. "You are healed. You are free to go anywhere you want, and you came back." Sky Dancer ate the meat, and then turned his head to fix Owen with an unblinking golden stare. Owen could have sworn the hawk nodded slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement between survivors who had both chosen to stay. Spring arrived gradually, melting the snow and coaxing green shoots from the warming earth. Owen and Otsana worked together to repair winter damage to the cabin and prepare Otsana's garden plot for planting. They had received the seeds from the same trading post where Owen had bought the silver comb, and Otsana was excited to try growing some new vegetables this year. One morning in April, as they worked side by side in the garden, Otsana suddenly stopped and pressed a hand to her stomach. Owen looked up in concern. "Are you all right?" She met his eyes with a wondering expression. "I think I am pregnant." Owen dropped his hoe and moved to her side. "Are you sure?" "Not completely certain, but the signs are there. I have been feeling sick in the mornings, and I am late for my monthly bleeding. It is too early to know for sure, but I think so. A baby." Their baby. The thought filled Owen with a combination of joy and terror. "How do you feel about it?" he asked carefully, wanting to honor whatever she was feeling. Otsana smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. "I am happy," she said. "Scared too, but mostly happy. I had started to think I might never have children, that I would grow old alone in these hills. But now I have you, and maybe we will have a baby, and everything feels possible." Owen pulled her close and kissed her thoroughly, trying to put all his feelings into the gesture. When they finally broke apart, both of them were grinning like fools. "I am going to be a father," he said wonderingly. "I am going to have a family." "We are going to have a family," Otsana corrected. "Together." The pregnancy became certain over the following weeks, and Owen threw himself into preparing for their child's arrival with the same energy he brought to everything. He spent days making a cradle from smooth pine, carving simple designs into the wood. He hunted more aggressively, wanting to ensure they had plenty of dried meat stored for the months when Otsana would be recovering from childbirth. Otsana bloomed with pregnancy. Despite the morning sickness that plagued her through May, she seemed to glow with an inner light. Owen found her more beautiful than ever, and told her so frequently until she would laugh and tell him to stop being foolish. But he was not being foolish. He was simply happy, happier than he had ever imagined being possible. Every morning he woke up next to his wife in their cabin, with Sky Dancer watching over them from his perch, and felt like the luckiest man alive. Summer came warm and bright. Otsana's garden flourished, producing more vegetables than they could eat fresh. They spent long evenings preserving food, canning what they could and drying the rest. Owen had ridden to the trading post and sent a letter to his brother Thomas, explaining everything that had happened and why he would not be coming to Sakaro after all. Thomas's response came in August, brought by a passing trader. The letter was warm and congratulatory, full of happiness for Owen's marriage and excitement about becoming an uncle. He wrote that he had hired 2 men to help with the ranch and that everything was going well. He hoped to meet Otsana someday and said Owen should bring his wife and child to visit whenever they felt ready for the journey. "Your brother sounds kind," Otsana said after Owen read the letter aloud to her. "I would like to meet him someday." "Maybe next spring," Owen suggested. "After the baby is born and old enough to travel, we could take a trip south, let Thomas meet his nephew or niece." "I would like that." Otsana's pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and into fall. She grew larger and moved more carefully, but she remained active and healthy. Owen hovered like an anxious shadow, always ready to help with anything she needed, until finally Otsana had to sit him down and tell him firmly that she was pregnant, not dying, and he needed to relax. "I am sorry," he said, properly chastened. "I just worry." "I know you do. But women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I am strong, and this baby is strong. Everything will be fine." The baby came in November, almost exactly a year after Owen had first arrived at the cabin. Labor started in the early morning and progressed steadily through the day. Owen stayed by Otsana's side the entire time, holding her hand and offering water, feeling completely helpless in the face of what she was going through. Otsana was incredible, strong and focused even when the pain was clearly intense. She had explained that in her mother's traditions, women often gave birth alone or with only other women present, but she wanted Owen there. He felt honored by that trust, even as he felt terrified by his own uselessness. As evening approached, Otsana gave one final tremendous effort and their child entered the world with a lusty cry. Owen, following Otsana's earlier instructions, caught the baby and carefully cleared the infant's nose and mouth. He looked down through tears and saw that they had a son. "A boy," he said, his voice breaking. "Otsana, we have a son." "Is he healthy?" she asked weakly. "All his fingers and toes." Owen checked carefully, counting each tiny digit. "Perfect," he confirmed. "He is absolutely perfect." They cleaned the baby together and wrapped him in soft cloth. Otsana had prepared weeks before. Then, Owen helped Otsana deliver the afterbirth and cleaned her up as best he could, before helping her into a clean nightdress. Throughout it all, their son cried and waved his tiny fists, clearly unhappy about his abrupt change of circumstances. But when Otsana finally held him and brought him to her breast, the baby quieted immediately and began to nurse. Owen sat beside them on the bed, one arm around his wife and one hand gently touching his son's head, and felt completely overwhelmed by love. "What should we name him?" Otsana asked quietly. They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but had not made a final decision. Now, looking at his son's tiny face, Owen knew exactly what felt right. "What was your father's name?" he asked. "I never knew him," Otsana admitted. "He died before I was born, but my mother told me he was called Nahale. It means swift." "And your uncle, the one who taught you to hunt and track?" "Goyakla, it means one who yawns." Owen smiled. "That is not quite right for a newborn, but what about Nahale Yates? It honors your father's memory and sounds strong." Otsana's eyes filled with tears. "You would do that. Give him an Apache name. He is half Apache," Owen said simply. "Your heritage should be part of his identity, something he can be proud of. Besides, Nahale Yates sounds right to me." "Then Nahale he is," Otsana agreed, looking down at their nursing son. "Welcome to the world, little swift one. You are so loved already." Sky Dancer, who had been watching the entire process from his perch with unusual stillness, suddenly spread his wings and called out, a piercing cry that seemed almost celebratory. They all looked over at the hawk, and Otsana laughed. "Even Sky Dancer welcomes him," she said. That night, with Otsana and Nahale both sleeping peacefully, Owen sat by the fire and let himself feel everything he had been holding back during the intensity of the birth. Relief that it was over and both mother and child were healthy. Joy at becoming a father. Gratitude for the unlikely series of events that had brought him to this place. If he had not stopped to investigate a hawk's scream. If he had not taken the time to free Sky Dancer from that trap. If Otsana had not had the courage to ask a stranger to stay the winter. If he had not been willing to take a chance on something unknown. So many small choices that had led to this moment, to a family sleeping peacefully in a cabin in the New Mexico hills. Owen had spent so many years running from exactly this, terrified of being trapped or tied down. But now he understood that he had been running from the wrong thing. Real freedom was not avoiding connection. Real freedom was choosing who and what to connect to, then building a life around those choices. Nahale proved to be a healthy, strong baby who grew quickly. He had Otsana's dark hair and eyes, but Owen's nose and chin. By his first Christmas, he was crawling everywhere, getting into everything, and keeping his parents constantly busy. Sky Dancer took an immediate interest in the baby. The hawk would watch from his perch as Nahale played on the floor, and sometimes he would call softly, as if talking to the child. Otsana said Sky Dancer had appointed himself as guardian, and Owen believed it. The hawk was fiercely protective of their small family. The winter passed quickly with a baby to care for. Nahale required constant attention, feeding and changing and rocking to sleep. But even in the exhaustion that came with new parenthood, Owen and Otsana were happy. They worked as a team, supporting each other through the difficult nights and celebrating each new milestone Nahale reached. Spring came again, and with it the warming weather that made travel possible. True to his word, Owen began planning a trip to visit his brother Thomas in Socorro. They would wait until Nahale was a bit older, maybe in late spring or early summer, then make the journey south. "Are you nervous?" Owen asked Otsana one evening as they discussed the upcoming trip. "About meeting Thomas and seeing Socorro." "A little," she admitted. "I have not been to a town in years, and I know how some white people look at Apaches. I do not want to face that hatred." "Thomas is not like that," Owen assured her. "And anyone who shows you disrespect will answer to me. You are my wife, the mother of my child. Anyone who cannot treat you with the respect you deserve does not deserve our time." Otsana smiled and kissed him. "You are fierce when you want to be, Owen Yates, only when it comes to protecting my family." They made the journey in June when Nahale was 7 months old. The trip took nearly 2 weeks, traveling slowly with a baby and camping each night under the stars. Sky Dancer followed for the first few days, flying overhead and roosting in trees near their campsites. But eventually he turned back toward the cabin, apparently unwilling to travel too far from his territory. "He will be waiting when we return," Otsana said, watching the hawk disappear into the northern sky. Socorro was larger than Owen remembered, grown prosperous from nearby silver mines. They found Thomas's ranch about 5 miles outside of town, a spread of several hundred acres with a new house and barn. Thomas himself came running when he saw them riding up, his limp barely noticeable now that his leg had fully healed. "Owen," he shouted, grinning broadly. "You made it." The brothers embraced, and then Owen turned to help Otsana dismount with Nahale in her arms. "Thomas," This is my wife, Otsana, and our son, Nahale. Thomas approached more slowly now, his eyes moving between Otsana and the baby. For a moment, Owen tensed, wondering if his brother would show prejudice despite the warm words of his letter. But then Thomas smiled, genuine and welcoming, and held out his hand to Otsana. "It is an honor to meet you," he said. "Owen's letter told me how remarkable you are, but I see now he undersold it. Welcome to our ranch." Otsana shook his hand, clearly relieved by the warm reception. "Thank you for inviting us. Owen has told me much about you." "All lies, I assure you," Thomas joked, then turned his attention to Nahale. "And this handsome fellow must be my nephew. May I?" Otsana carefully transferred Nahale to Thomas's arms, and the baby stared up at his uncle with solemn dark eyes. Thomas made silly faces until Nahale cracked a smile, and everyone laughed. They stayed at the ranch for 2 weeks, and it was a wonderful visit. Thomas had hired a cook and housekeeper, a Mexican woman named Rosa, who took an immediate shine to Otsana and baby Nahale. The two women spent hours talking in Spanish, which Otsana spoke well from her childhood near Mexican settlements. Thomas showed them around the ranch, introduced them to his hired men, and took them into Socorro proper one day. Owen kept a protective eye on Otsana during that visit, ready to defend her against any hostility. There were some stares and whispers, but most people were simply curious or indifferent. One shopkeeper refused to serve them, but Thomas immediately left the store and vowed never to return. "You do not have to do that," Otsana said quietly as they walked away. "Yes, I do," Thomas replied firmly. "You are family. Anyone who insults family insults me. That man will not get another cent from me or anyone I know." By the time they left to head back north, Otsana and Thomas had formed a genuine friendship. Thomas made them promise to visit again the following year, and he extracted a promise that he could come visit them as well. "I want to see this cabin Owen wrote about," he said, "and meet the famous hawk." The ride home felt easier than the journey south had been. They were more practiced at traveling with a baby now, and Nahale seemed to enjoy the adventure. When they finally crested the last hill and saw their cabin in the valley below, Owen felt his heart swell. This was home. This was where they belonged. Sky Dancer was indeed waiting for them, perched on his outdoor roost and watching their approach. When they were close enough, the hawk launched himself into the air and circled above them, calling out a welcome. Nahale saw him and laughed, reaching his chubby hands toward the bird. "Sky Dancer missed us," Otsana said with a smile. "Or perhaps he missed his daily ration of fresh meat." They settled back into their routine quickly. Summer passed in a blur of work and family time. Nahale grew bigger and more active, pulling himself up on furniture and trying to walk. Sky Dancer remained his constant guardian, always watching, always alert to any potential danger. Fall came again, and with it the anniversary of the day Owen had found Sky Dancer in that trap. 2 years now since a hawk scream had changed the entire course of his life. He mentioned it to Otsana one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. 2 years, he mused. Sometimes it feels like another lifetime, and sometimes it feels like yesterday. You ever regret it? Otsana asked. Stopping to help, staying the winter, choosing this life instead of continuing on to Socorro. Owen pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. Not for one single second. This is exactly where I am supposed to be. Nahale, playing at their feet with a wooden toy Owen had carved, looked up and said his first word. Dada. Both parents froze, then looked at each other with matching expressions of joy and shock. Did he just? Owen started. Dada, Nahale repeated, pulling himself up using Owen's leg and grinning proudly. Owen scooped his son up and held him high, both of them laughing. "That is right, Nahale. I am your Dada. And do you know how much I love you, more than all the stars in the sky?" Otsana watched them with tears in her eyes, happy tears that spoke of contentment and belonging. She had built this cabin hoping to create a home, and now it was filled with more love than she had ever imagined possible. The years passed, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. Nahale grew into a bright, energetic boy who could ride before he could properly walk, and who showed early talent for tracking and hunting. Owen taught him to read and write, while Otsana taught him the stories and traditions of her people. He grew up bilingual, fluent in both English and Apache, comfortable in both worlds. When Nahale was 3, Otsana became pregnant again. This time, Owen was calmer during the pregnancy, having been through it once before. Their second child, a daughter they named Ayana, was born during a thunderstorm in late August. She came into the world with a full head of black hair and lungs that could rival Sky Dancer's piercing cry. "A daughter," Owen breathed, holding the tiny girl for the first time. "We have a daughter, Otsana." "Ayana," Otsana said softly. "Eternal bloom, because she will always grow and change and become more beautiful." Nahale was fascinated by his baby sister and appointed himself her protector from day one. He would sit beside her cradle for hours, telling her stories and showing her his toys. Sky Dancer, now quite old for a hawk, seemed equally enchanted. The bird would perch nearby whenever Ayana was outside, watching over her with the same vigilance he had shown for Nahale. Thomas visited regularly now, making the trip north 2 or 3 times a year. He had married a woman from Sakaro, a widow named Alina with 2 children of her own, and they all made the journey together sometimes. The cabin would be crowded during those visits, but it was a joyful chaos that everyone treasured. When Nahale was 5 and Ayana was 2, Owen and Otsana decided it was time to expand the cabin. Working together with help from Thomas during one of his visits, they added a second room with a loft above for the children to sleep. It gave everyone more space while keeping the family close together. The ranch, as they had started calling it despite not having cattle, had grown over the years. Owen had built a proper barn, expanded the corral, and cleared more land for Otsana's ever-expanding garden. They had added chickens for eggs and a milk cow for fresh dairy. It was not a large operation, but it provided everything they needed and more. Owen sometimes took jobs in nearby towns, working for a week or 2 at a time to earn extra money. But he never stayed away long, always anxious to return to his family. Otsana kept the homestead running smoothly in his absence, proving over and over that she was fully capable of managing everything herself. But she did not have to. That was the difference. She was not alone anymore. Sky Dancer lived to be 15 years old, ancient for a wild hawk. He had slowed considerably in his final years, his hunting less frequent, his flights shorter. But he never left the ranch, never abandoned the family he had chosen. When he died one quiet morning in early spring, they found him on his favorite perch, looking peaceful, as if he had simply fallen asleep. Nahale, now 7, cried openly at the hawk's death. Ayana, too young to fully understand, cried because her brother was crying. Owen and Otsana held their children and grieved together for the remarkable bird who had brought them all together. They buried Sky Dancer on a hill overlooking the cabin, under a young pine tree. Owen carved a simple marker from wood, and Otsana placed some of the hawk's most beautiful feathers beside the grave. They each said words of farewell and thanks, acknowledging how much Sky Dancer had meant to their family. "He brought us together," Owen said, his arm around Otsana's shoulders. That day I heard him screaming in that trap. I had no idea I was riding toward my entire future. Sky Dancer did not just save himself by making that noise. He saved me too. He saved both of us, Otsana added. I was so lonely before you came, so afraid I had made a mistake trying to live alone. But Sky Dancer brought you here and everything changed. Life continued as it always does, even after loss. The children grew. Nahale showed early promise as a hunter and tracker, skills inherited from his mother. Ayana proved to have her father's way with animals, gentle and patient, able to calm even the most skittish horse. When Nahale was 10, Otsana became pregnant again, a surprise after years without another child. She was older now, 33, and the pregnancy was harder than the previous two had been. Owen hovered like he had during their first child, anxious and protective, until Otsana had to remind him again that she was strong and everything would be fine. Their third child, another son they named Kai, was born healthy and strong. He had his father's light brown hair, unusual in the family, and everyone joked that he would be the one who looked most white. But he had his mother's eyes, dark and intelligent, and her high cheekbones. With 3 children now, the cabin was truly bustling. Owen built another addition, giving Ayana her own small room while the boys shared the loft. The homestead rang with the sounds of children playing, chickens clucking, the cow lowing to be milked. It was loud and messy and chaotic, and Owen loved every single moment of it. He was 40 now, his brown hair starting to show threads of gray. Otsana was 33, still as beautiful as the day he had first seen her standing in that clearing with Sky Dancer. They had been married for 10 years, been together for 11. It felt like both forever and no time at all. One evening, after the children were finally asleep and the cabin was quiet, Owen and Otsana sat on their porch watching the stars. It had become their habit over the years, this quiet time together after the chaos of the day. "Are you happy?" Owen asked, a question he had asked many times over the years. "Yes," Otsana replied without hesitation. "More than I ever imagined being possible. You?" "Deliriously happy," Owen confirmed. "I was thinking today about that version of myself who rode through these hills all those years ago. How lost I was, how certain I was that I did not want to be tied down, how foolish I was." "Not foolish," Otsana corrected gently. "Just young and not yet ready. You had to wander until you were ready to stop wandering, and I had to be alone until I was ready to let someone in. We both had to become the people we needed to be before we could find each other." Owen pulled her close and kissed her, deep and sweet and full of everything he felt. When they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling. "I love you, Otsana Yates," he said. "And I love you, Owen Yates, for all the years behind us and all the years still to come." The years did come, one after another, bringing their share of joys and sorrows, triumphs and challenges. Nahale grew into a fine young man, skilled in both his mother's and father's ways. He eventually married a young woman from Taos, a trader's daughter, and they built their own cabin about 5 miles from Owen and Otsana's homestead. They gave Owen and Otsana their first grandchildren, twin girls who brought new energy and laughter to family gatherings. Ayana proved to be the scholar of the family, learning to read and write with a voracious appetite for knowledge. When she was 16, she convinced her parents to let her attend school in Santa Fe, living with a teacher's family during the school year and coming home for summers. It was hard letting her go, but Owen and Otsana recognized her hunger to learn and supported her dreams. Kai, the youngest, turned out to be a builder. By the time he was 15, he had helped Owen construct a new, larger barn, a smokehouse, and a workshop. He talked about becoming an architect someday, designing buildings that would stand for generations. Owen encouraged him, proud of all his children for their different gifts and ambitions. Thomas remained a constant presence in their lives until he died at 63 from a heart attack. His death hit Owen hard, grief for the only family he had left from his childhood. But Thomas had lived a good life, surrounded by people who loved him, and that provided some comfort. Elena, Thomas's widow, continued to visit regularly with her children and grandchildren. The two families remained close, bound by affection and shared history. As Owen entered his 50s and then his 60s, he slowed down somewhat but never stopped working. The homestead was his pride and joy, this place he and Otsana had built together through decades of labor and love. Every fence post, every garden bed, every repaired roof spoke of their shared life. Otsana, too, showed the passage of years, her black hair turning gray, lines appearing around her eyes and mouth. But to Owen she was still the most beautiful woman in the world, and he told her so regularly until she would laugh and tell him his eyes were failing with age. When Owen was 65, he finally taught Nahale and Kai everything he knew about running the homestead. He did not plan to retire completely, but he wanted them to be able to manage things if anything happened to him. It was time to make sure his family would be taken care of. That same year, they made one final trip to Socorro, the whole family traveling together in a caravan of wagons. It had been years since they had made the journey, and Owen wanted to see Thomas's ranch one more time, to show his grandchildren where their uncle had lived and worked. The ranch had changed hands but was still thriving. The new owners graciously let them visit and walk the property, and Owen spent a long time standing at his brother's grave, remembering. "He would have been proud of you," Otsana said quietly, standing beside him. "Of the life you built, the family you raised, he loved you very much." "I know," Owen said. "I miss him every day." They returned home to New Mexico, to their cabin in the hills, and settled back into their rhythms. The grandchildren visited often, filling the homestead with the sound of young voices. Owen and Otsana taught them the same things they had taught their own children, passing down skills and stories and traditions. On a clear morning in October, 41 years after the day Owen had first heard Sky Dancers scream, he woke up feeling peaceful and content. He was 70 years old now, and his body ached in the mornings, but his heart was full. He looked over at Otsana, still sleeping beside him, and felt a surge of love so powerful it made his chest tight. 40 years they had been married. 41 years since they had met. Decades of life built together, of children raised and grandchildren cherished, of work and laughter and love. He rose carefully, trying not to wake her, and went outside to watch the sunrise. The hills were painted in autumn colors, gold and red and orange. The morning air was crisp and clean. In the barn he could hear the horses stirring. From Nahale's cabin down the valley, smoke rose from the chimney. This was his life. This was what he had built, and it was good. Otsana emerged from the cabin a few minutes later, wrapped in a shawl against the morning chill. She came and stood beside him, and he put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Everything," Owen replied. "I was thinking about the day I heard Sky Dancer screaming. How I almost kept riding because I was tired and wanted to make Socorro before the snow came. How my entire life changed because I decided to stop and investigate." "I was thinking about that too," Otsana admitted. "About how scared I was to ask you to stay, afraid you would refuse, afraid you would think I was foolish or presumptuous. But I asked anyway because I was desperate and lonely, and I knew somehow that you were a good man." "Best decision either of us ever made," Owen said. Best decision we ever made together, Otsana corrected. We both chose each other, and we kept choosing each other every day for 40 years. Owen turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. And I will keep choosing you for whatever time we have left. Every morning I wake up grateful that you trusted me enough to let me stay. You gave me everything, Otsana. A home, a family, a purpose. You gave me a life worth living. Tears shimmered in Otsana's eyes. You gave me the same. I built this cabin hoping to create a home, but it was just a shelter until you filled it with love. You saw me not as an Apache woman or a survivor, but as simply me. You loved me for exactly who I was. They stood holding each other as the sun rose higher, painting the world in golden light. Around them, their homestead stirred to life. In the barn, the animals called for breakfast. From the valley, they could hear Nahal's children laughing as they played. Inside the cabin, they would find breakfast to prepare and chores to complete, and another day of life together. It was ordinary and precious, and exactly what both of them had been searching for without knowing it. As they turned to go back inside, Otsana paused and looked up at the hill where they had buried Sky Dancer all those years ago. The pine tree had grown tall and strong, a living memorial to the hawk who had brought them together. "You think he knew?" she asked softly. "That day you freed him from the trap. Do you think Sky Dancer somehow knew what would happen, that finding you would change everything?" Owen considered the question seriously. "I think maybe he did," he finally said. "Animals know things we do not always understand. Maybe he felt that you needed help, that I needed to stop running, that we needed each other. Or maybe it was just chance, just luck, just the universe aligning in exactly the right way at exactly the right moment." "I like to think it was meant to be," Otsana said. "I like to think that somehow, across all the vastness of this territory, you and I were always going to find each other. Sky Dancer was just the way it happened." "Then that is what we will believe," Owen agreed. "Because the how does not matter nearly as much as the fact that it happened. We found each other. We built this life, and I would not change a single moment of it." They went inside together to start their day, and the door closed behind them on 40 years of shared history and whatever years still remained. Outside, the sun continued its climb into the sky. The horses whinnied in the barn. The chickens scratched in the yard. And on a distant hill, a pine tree swayed in the breeze, marking the resting place of a hawk who had screamed for help and received it, changing 2 lives forever in the process. The end of the story came years later, as all stories must, but it came gently, peacefully, exactly as it should. Owen passed first, at 76, dying quietly in his sleep with Otsana beside him and their children and grandchildren filling the cabin with love. Otsana followed 2 years later, at 70, having spent those final years surrounded by family and finally ready to rest. They were buried together on the same hill where Sky Dancer lay, under the spreading branches of the pine tree that had grown so tall and strong. Their children and grandchildren stood around the graves and told stories, remembering the remarkable love that had started with a hawk's scream and a stranger's kindness. Nahal's oldest son, who had inherited his grandmother's skill with animals, swore he saw a red-tailed hawk circling overhead during the burial. It landed briefly in the pine tree, seemed to look down at the gathering, then spread its wings and flew off toward the north. No one could say for certain if it had really happened, or if grief and love had conjured the vision. But everyone agreed it would have been fitting, a sign that Sky Dancer approved, that everything had come full circle as it was always meant to. The homestead remained in the family, passed down through generations. The cabin was expanded and modernized over the years, but the original room where Owen and Otsana had lived and loved was preserved as it had been. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren would sit in that room sometimes and feel the presence of those who had come before, the love that had built this place and filled it with life. And sometimes, when the wind blew just right through the hills of northern New Mexico, you could almost hear it, a hawk's piercing scream echoing across the years. A reminder that love can come from the most unexpected places, that kindness creates ripples that spread far beyond the moment, and that sometimes a single choice to stop and help can change absolutely everything. Owen Yates had been riding toward his brother's ranch in Socorro that October day in 1879. Instead, he rode toward his future, toward love and family and home, all because he heard a hawk screaming and decided to stop. All because an Apache woman named Otsana Cruz had the courage to ask a stranger to stay the winter. All because two lonely people found each other in the vast wilderness and chose to build something beautiful together. That was their story. That was their legacy. And it lived on long after they were gone, a testament to the enduring power of love, trust, and the connections we make that transform our lives in ways we can never anticipate. The hawk, the trap, the woman, the man, the cabin in the hills. All the pieces that fit together perfectly to create something extraordinary out of the ordinary circumstances of frontier life. They had lived fully, loved deeply, and left behind a family that carried their story forward. What more could anyone ask from a life? What better ending could there be than knowing your love created something that would outlast you, that would continue growing and spreading long after you were gone? Nothing. There was nothing better. Their story was complete, their circle closed, their love immortal in the lives they had touched and the family they had created. And somewhere in the hills of northern New Mexico, a hawk still flies, watching over the land where two souls once found each other and built a life that became legend.